believe in his word. For John, faith is open to everyone really, not just Jewish people, because Jesus is Saviour of the world. And now the third thing we're going to do is the healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda and the subsequent dialogue of Jesus. This is all of chapter 5. And as we turn now to chapter 5, we begin a new section in the Gospel, which is going to go right through from this chapter 5 to chapter 10, inclusive. This is how Father Raymond Brown and Francis Maloney, that's how they divide the Gospel, and it makes eminent sense to me. These 6 chapters are dominated by Jewish feasts. First off, the Sabbath, chapter 5, the Passover, chapter 6, then the Feast of Tabernacles and the Feast of the Dedication of the Temple. What's happening? Well, John is trying to grapple with how to make sense of the old Jewish feasts, now denied to Christians because we can no longer go to temple or to synagogue. The temple was destroyed and we've been expelled from the synagogue. And St. John comes to see that the old Jewish liturgical life was but a sign and a shadow of what God has done in Jesus. Jesus fulfills all the Jewish festivals and, in a profound sense, replaces them. And in chapter 5, we begin with Jesus replacing the Sabbath. In chapter 5, there are 3 parts that we'll talk about. The first is the miracle itself. The second is the Son continuing the Father's work of the Sabbath. And the third is Jesus calling upon witnesses to why he does this and his final attack on the Jewish position. So firstly, the miracle itself, which sets the scene for the whole dialogue after this. We are in the northeast of the temple. You'll see this map of Jerusalem. Well, just to the northeast is the pool. The pools, the 2 pools, where the sheep were brought into Jerusalem for sacrifice. And it's named Bethesda, probably House of Flowing. In the 20th century, the ruins of the miraculous medicinal baths next to the beautiful Crusader Church of St. Anne, if you've got to go to that extraordinary church, right next door are the ruins of these baths. In 2nd century AD, of course, they were paganized. Remember that Jerusalem was destroyed under 35 AD and made into a pagan city, Aelia Capitolana, and they were pagan medicinal baths. But we can go beyond that. We know that Simon, a high priest, had originally constructed 2 great pools around 200 BC to supply water to the temple. And 100 or so years later, nearby caves were adapted to serve as small medicinal baths. I think you can see this. You can see the 2 big pools and the medicinal baths nearby in the reconstruction of what the Pool of Siloam looked like. The pools were decommissioned by Herod the Great, but they continued to fill in winter, and they had 5 colonnades, and so in winter the sick would gather in the colonnades, and there were the nearby healing waters. Now, about the angel coming and disturbing the waters, that verse doesn't have a lot of witnesses in the ancient texts, so we're very unsure about whether that should be there or not. Verse 4. The story is a little bit like the synoptic account of the healing of the paralytic. But the main theme of the story is not so much the healing, but rather that it takes place on the Sabbath. The Sabbath has been violated. And if we remember that in the 400 years before Jesus, what the Jewish people really valued as a real source of their identity was keeping the Sabbath. Okay, so that's where we are. We'll move now into the dialogue. And the first part of this is that Jesus now speaks, and he says, the Son is continuing the Father's work. And what's all this about? Well, in the Synoptic Gospels, he also disregards the Sabbath. There he gives two reasons why he can do that. He gives a humanitarian reason. If you're allowed to pull an animal out of the hole, why can't you cure a human being? And he gives a theological reason too. If the Old Testament priests were allowed to work on the Sabbath, why not someone who is greater than the priests and greater even than the temple? The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. That's the Synoptic Gospels. That's our approach to the question. How they have Jesus approach the question. In St. John's Gospel, which, as we are saying, goes more to the heart of things, Jesus speaks of that intimate relationship he has with God, calling God Father and himself Son. My Father is at work even now, so I am at work too. And of course, for the Jewish people, as it says in the text, that's blasphemy. Well, let's have a look at a little bit more closely at Jesus, what Jesus has to say about all this. We can divide his speech into two. Verses 19 to 30, which give us an explanation of what my Father is at work now and so must I be too. What's that all about? And then verses 31 to 47, where we have Jesus giving us a set of witnesses to bolster what he's doing. So firstly, the first section now. What does my Father is at work even now, so I am at work too? What's that mean? Well, behind it, of course, is the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament. Exodus chapter 20 verse 11, which speaks of the third commandment to keep the Sabbath. And in so doing adds these words. In 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, but on the seventh he rested. That is why the Lord has blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. But the rabbis said, well, we all know that God doesn't really rest on the Sabbath because people are born and people die. So people get life, and when they die, they're judged. They're judged. God gives life, and God judges those who die on the Sabbath, as on every day. And Jesus says, my Father is at work even now, and so must I work. Therefore, Jesus gives life, and Jesus is a judge. Jesus grants life. Just as the Father raises the dead and grants life, so also the Son grants life to all those to whom he wishes to do it. And Jesus is judge. In fact, it isn't the Father who judges anyone. No, He's turned all judgment to the Son.